Got myself Sean out Sack and AppSec Bloke. We're going to try hack, or more like a pen test on OWASP Juice Shop. OWASP Juice Shop is a vulnerable web app. It's written in Node, as far as I'm aware. I've never tackled it before, so this is going to be purely from a black box testing. Never touched it before. I did do some preliminary work on this. So one of the things I used was OWASP Zap, again free, to do a crawl of it. I just have it running locally, and try to do a Zap has has a kind of vulnerability scanner built in, so it found a bunch of issues here. So we'll look at those. I did it before because otherwise we'd be spending about 2-3 hours just staring at OWASP Zap while it does its thing. And then another one I used was Nikto. Nikto. I think I'm pronouncing it right.
Nikto.
Yep.
Nikto. Yep.
That as well produced a set of results that we could probably go through. I don't know how well it works because it works from command line. So I'm not too sure how that works, especially with the app like Juice Shop. I think it's very JavaScript heavy. So you essentially need a browser to render a lot of the functionality. But we'll see how it goes. So let's begin. Mark, you want to add anything before we dive in?
No, let's crack on. Nikto is a tool built into the Kali framework, so you get that free when you download. When you get Kali free, right? Of course, but you get Nikto as part and parcel of the Kali implementation. And yes, it is CLI, but it just does. It's a bit like SQL Map. It just makes a shitload of HTTP requests to the application and comes back with interesting things like headers. It'll look for RCE bugs, SQL bugs, cross-site scripting bugs. It's pretty cool, and it's free.
So yeah, here's like the output of it that it runs. So you can see it just run via the command line. You just basically specify the host that you want to scan and the output. So we generate a HTML file, and off it went and scanned it. This would be unauthenticated, so it's just hitting the site as a user who's not authenticated. All right, so one of the very first things I typically do is there's two tools that I normally look to. One is testssl.sh. So if you go to testssl.sh, funny enough, you can find the details about the tool as well as how to download it. Generally, I clone the repo from GitHub, and then you can actually run it. So you run testssl.sh. The host : port. So we're running it on 443, not 433, 443, and then yeah, just click it off. So what this will do is a check or scan on the TLS HTTPS. So all of things like certificates, as well as supported protocols, supported Cypher suites, and that kind of thing. This is typically something you do not for like a CTF, but certainly if you're doing a pen test, you want to make sure that if preferably the site has HTTPS and that it's sufficiently configured, so you don't have weak Cypher suites and weak protocols and that kind of thing. So off it will go. What else I normally do is there's another utility called AHA. So I'll pipe the output from this into that, and what that does is allow you to take the output and generate an HTML file. So it's a nice little handy way of having some sort of report that you can then give someone. So it's still going. While that's running there, we'll also kick off another tool that I use quite often. There's a bunch of these. So SSL scan's another one. So again, follows the same syntax. I think if you leave out 443, it defaults to 443.
You've got too many N's in your training there.
Yeah. I think it defaults to 443 if you leave it up, but yeah. And as you can see, this one's a lot faster because it's not doing as much. So some of the things it looks for is like what software suites got enabled. So I'm actually doing good things. TLS 1.3 enabled. Interesting. So that must be the later versions of Ubuntu that have that enabled when you have Nginx, because that's what's running in front of the Juice Shop. So just so you're aware, I've got Nginx acting as a front-facing proxy or reverse proxy, and then that's talking to the Docker image, which is actually running Juice Shop. So that's why there's like HTTPS and that there. So that's interesting that it comes out of the box with TLS 1.3, which is good. Some of the other things, like obviously you don't want heartbleed and compression. Software suites, basically RSA key exchange you don't want, because that doesn't allow perfect forward secrecy. So if you can get a bunch of traffic, you could potentially get the key and use that to decrypt, or the share key. You can decrypt the traffic. And then weaker software suites. On my blog post somewhere, I did have like a cheat sheet type thing of TLS. So I explained the different parts and why you want to use things like AES, ECDHE, which is elliptic curved Diffie-Hellman. I always get this wrong with the E. Ferro? No. The more, I forgot which one it is, but anyway. That's going to allow a perfect forward secrecy, and it means you'll have a much better and more private connection. Ephemeral, I think I always get that name up.
Important to point out, I think, though, Sean, in fairness, that even if you speak to people like Ivan Ristic, who is like one of the big daddies of TLS, we don't see that many real-world TLS attacks that are successful. So it's important to maintain good practice, but it's also important not to get too carried away about having a configuration that might look a bit bad, but when actual fact it's not.
Yeah. So generally what I would do is, if I find any issues, which, okay, it's got T, I'll come back to that now, probably why it's got T. Generally any issues, depending on them here, like if it's more weaker software suites like CBC or something like that, I generally just maybe make those like info or something, or minor. It's generally something that you do want to address, but it's nothing urgent and the world's not falling. If you have things like SSL v3, you probably want to look at that sooner than later, because that's vulnerable to the likes of Poodle. Also, just as important as the issue itself, it also portrays, so you've got a reputation associated with it. So say for instance you're a company that says, hey, I really value security and quote take your security seriously, and then you got things like SSL v3 enabled. Do you? So that's why I say, like, sometimes there's more harm from a reputational point of view than the actual vulnerability itself.
I agree completely with that. And obviously we live in a social media world where people will call you out pretty quickly. There's also the compliance part of it, and I know it's a dirty word for a lot of people, but bottom line is, if you're operating anything that processes cardholder data, then you are not allowed to operate anything weaker than TLS 1.2 under the terms of the PCI DSS. So that's a fact.
Alright, so this here, it says obviously CBC suffers, so we'll dive into that. It's probably because of these ones here that are supporting. So without anything in front of it. So the way these software suites work is it's the key exchange, I forgot what this bit is, the symmetric cipher, the mode that symmetric cipher operates in, if it's a block cipher, and then lastly the MAC, which is your message authentication. That's used to validate that the data hasn't been tampered with. Without a key exchange in front of it. That means it's RSA. So you'll see here RSA, and as I mentioned, RSA doesn't have perfect secrecy, perfect forward secrecy. So you could potentially get the symmetric key that uses to encrypt the data, and that's done with this algorithm. But that's really getting into the weeds. So that's why it's money. I did see a T, but some of the other things you want to look at. So obviously making sure the certificate is actually for the server. So here it is. It's as I thought. So you got to be careful with these tools if you're using them against your internal services. You will get a lot of them going, oh my gosh, the certificate is terrible. It's terrible because it doesn't trust that certificate. It's because it's using a certificate chain that it bundles itself or using the OS level one. So in this case, it's probably using the OS level one. I don't have my own custom internal CA. So at home, I run my own CA. So it doesn't trust that. So it's saying the certificate's untrusted. To the tool, it is untrusted, but I know this is a good CA. Two ways about this. You can either ignore it and say, like, look, this is a CA we trust, or try add this, probably a better route, add this CA certificate to the trust tool. OCSP is pretty dead, so I wouldn't worry about that. I don't know why it's highlighted in red. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I do see some things making a big deal out about it, but yeah. Anyway. Yeah, and it's just other things like the certificate validity and all that stuff. Other things that we'll start looking for is some of the common vulnerabilities, which are further down, which are these. So these are now getting into things like the Heartbleed, Poodle, Logjam, all that kind of stuff. The only one we seem to be kind of vulnerable to is Breach. So if you're doing a report, you might just put this as informational. And probably the Lucky 13, which is the CBC stuff, is, again, probably just informational. Anyway, so that's generally like where I start off with, because that's your kind of first entry into the application. So any questions from there? So I see one question. What tools do you all use when documenting a pen test? So there's Cherry Tree, Faraday, Vim, online tools, like pentesttools.com. So my answer is I didn't. Because of my role, I wasn't a pen tester, so I didn't produce reports as such. I didn't have a client that I go, hey, pen tester, yeah, here's the results. Reporting is very important though when you're doing a pen test, because that's ultimately what the customer gets from all your work. So you have to make sure it highlights everything, explains everything, and also really important, I've seen some reports like, hey, you got these issues. That's great, but how do we fix those issues? So what's the remediation or the recommended remediation? So they know what the issue is, how to reproduce it, because that's also really important. So when you're fixing something, you need to be able to say, hey, I've fixed it. I need to test it. And then how to fix it. So yeah, you've mentioned tools, Cherry Tree, I've never heard about. Faraday, I certainly have. It's called like I think the term it's RPE, integrated pen test environment. It does have ability to produce reports. Vim would just be standard kind of note taking. And pentesttools.com I've never touched. I think a large majority will probably just use Word, and the company will have a template. I did produce some reports, very few. There weren't official pen test reports, and that's where I just used like some sort of template, and it was a Word doc.
Yeah. Also, just to add to that, Sean, it kind of depends on what you're doing as well, because I think it's fair to say there's a bit of a difference between a pen test and a vulnerability scan. And a lot of the tools that will do a vulnerability scan, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Nessus is one, NetSpark is another one. They'll actually produce quite neatly formatted reports for you. yeah, they're not necessarily going to be branded in your company's flattering logo and all that kind of stuff, but they will give you the essential information you need. So what's the problem that's been discovered? What's the severity of that problem? What's the context of it? And what's the remediation to fix the problem? So you do, there are certain tools, and admittedly a lot of them are paid for, but you will get that information out, and you can actually quite literally present that report in its pure form to people that can fix the problem.
Yep. And please, 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 please do not give those reports as the pen test. They should be auxiliary reports to the pen test. So you still should write your own reports, interpret the results. Don't go, here's a NetSparker scan or something like that, and go, there's my pen test, the report from the NetSparker scan. That's not how you do pen tests.
Yeah, don't call a NetSparker scan report the results of a pen test, because it's not a pen test. It's a vulnerability scan.
Yeah, and typically a pen test, as you'll see, will involve many tools. So we already ran one tool here. We've run another tool here, and as you see, like I often run multiple tools to do the same job, because sometimes they might pick things up that the other tool might not. So there's sometimes an overlap between the two. So kind of like the many eyes thing. Like many eyes can help find things that one set of eyes might not. So yeah. And then the report's actually correlating all the results together into a single report. Alright, so starting off, we had this, here's Juice Shop. So the first thing you want to do, I'm not going to go through the details how to configure a proxy. I did do a session a while ago on configuring it. There's this awesome plugin, I highly recommend this. If you are doing these kind of things, I forgot what this is called. This is called Switchy Omega. What it allows you to do is switch your proxy in your browser. So if you had like a corporate proxy, so you can go back to system proxy, that's like your default system settings. Direct means no proxy, and then burp, which I've configured as a local host on port 80. So it just means I can switch between my different proxies and actually avoid going through the proxy in some cases. And it's just really handy to have. Also interesting here, so one of the proxy that I'm using here is OWASP Zap. I'm going to try use it. I've not really used it that much. I much prefer Burp. To me, the Burp Suite is just a more intuitive product for me. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Zap. Zap is free. Burp, you get the community edition, which is free with limited features, and then the pro edition is paid for. It's about $330. If you're using the corporate environment, that's money well spent. It has things like scanners and plugins and a whole bunch of other things. So the reason I also mentioned that Zap has this kind of head thing, which doesn't really seem to be working that well now. But these are supposed to be like heads on the page, so you don't actually have to switch between the page and back to Zap. I think it's a pretty cool idea. I've never really played with it, so I guess we'll find out how that works, if it can get it to working. But yeah, so hit the page. So one of the first things you might want to do when you hit the page is just look at the page itself. So as I said, I've run through with Zap, so you probably want to crawl it as an unauthenticated user and then run a scan. So crawling is pretty simple. You'll spider it, and it'll go off and try to get the different links. And then once that's done, you can go active scan and then run an active scan. You can configure it to scan for any certain things and that kind of thing. I just use the defaults. Anything to add there, Mark?
No. Crack on.
So,
sorry. Actually, no. There is a little point. A couple of people are talking about different proxies out there. I commented back in the chat. There are lots of really cool tools out there. Scott mentioned Fiddler. I use Fiddler. Foxy Proxy. Cossie Cole mentioned that one. There are tons of really cool proxies out there, and you don't have to pay for them a lot of the time.
Yeah. There's another cool one that's also MRTM proxy that has a CLR interface, a web, which is I think based off Chrome developer tools. So if you ever use Chrome developer tools, it will be very really familiar to you. And then also has a Python API, so that's quite flexible. In the pen testing world, pretty much everyone uses Burp. So if you want to get involved with pen testing, certainly it's going to be your own preference, but you're probably better off trying to maybe get more familiar with Burp. You might find a lot of the courses and that are more geared towards Burp. And there's a whole ton of plugins in that for Burp. Alright, so I'm going to start on the landing page, which I can't find, and this is why I start getting to where I'm more comfortable with Burp, because it kind of puts in a tree and it's a lot easier to see the different resources. I think when you hit it, so one of the things as well, cache pages can kill you, so make sure you also clear your cache before you hit the site, because there may be things that aren't actually re-downloaded or called because of the cache. So I think it's in history. Yeah, so history is basically where all the calls are made. And you can see where it gets. I'm trying to look for the initial call I made. Okay, so here's the initial call. If I double click it, yeah, it should pop it up. So here's a request. And you click on the response, you can actually see the response. Depending on how this goes, I might actually even switch to Burp, because I've got to apologize. I'm more comfortable in Burp. But we'll see how it goes. So you want to just, as I said, initially hit the page and just see what's returned. That's a standard request, but we'll see what's actually returned. So some of the things I noticed, this would be a file in itself. It's returning a server version. So this is where it's a thing called banner grabbing. And this is information disclosure. So this on its own is not a vulnerability. I can't exploit the server just having that version number. But what it does allow an attacker to do is they can go, oh, okay, there's Nginx 1.17.10. Let me go to my trusty vulnerability database and see if there's a known vulnerability in that version of Nginx, and if there's an exploit that I could possibly leverage. So that's why it's important to try mask these, and often the servers themselves will have some sort of configuration that allows you to turn that off, so it's not returned.
It's interesting, isn't it, as well, because you do hear some people argue that it's security by obscurity, but that's bullshit. It's not. Advertising the versions of your stack is not a great idea for all the reasons that you just described there, Sean. So returning our web server as your server header is not a bad thing to do. Returning the actual version that you're running it is a bad thing to do. So I completely agree.
Right. It's not the end of the world. I mean, ideally you should be patched, so it should just mean that the attacker just can't exploit it, but it's hang
on. Ideally it should be patched, did you say?
I know.
Carry on, sir.
It's one of those like security hygiene type things. So I'm just checking on Twitch. So there were some questions. Sorry, going back to Burp Suite. So one advantage of Zap over Burp Suite is the integration with CR. That certainly is a very big thing. I know a lot of companies do use a Zap in their CR builds. I think that's probably where it's most commonly used, in fact, with this automated active scanning and that's awesome, because what that means is in your CI build, you have a build run, deploys it into some test environment, you have Zap run, check everything's fine. If everything's fine, the build passes. If there's major or critical vulnerabilities, you can cause the build to fail, and then someone actually needs to fix it before it can move on to the next stage. That's all good DevSecOps type stuff. So yeah, that's a really good point. All
I
right,
get the feeling we might have some OWASP people here in the room tonight.
yeah, and and again, it's not me having a dig at OWASP. I think OWASP is great. I'm not having a dig at Zap. It's just something I just try to use. I just can't get it to work for me. There may be other people out there who might prefer Zap to Burp. To me, it's just I'm more comfortable with Burp, so that's just kind of where I live.
I think it goes back to a point you made earlier, Sean, a really important point, which is no one tool that you use provides you with 100% reliability. And I think it's important to recognize that it's a blend of tools to get the right answers that you're looking for. So it could well be a mixture of Nikto and SQL Map and Zap and so on and so forth, and a bit of Burp. It's the right tools for the job at the end of the day, and it might be more than one. And you made that point earlier. It should be re-emphasized.
Yep, exactly. All right, coming back to some.
Sorry, Sean. Sorry, mate. Before you continue, I made that comment about there may well be somebody from OWASP in the room, and Frietta has commented back in a kind of touche style, which is I'm only on the board of the OWASP Global AppSec Conference, so we'll look forward to getting a gig with you guys at some point. Cheers.
Yeah. And
hang on. Sorry, Sean. I'm pissing on your chips again. And Koshi is just a guy with 11,000 commits on Juice Shop. So we've basically got OWASP AppSec people in the room tonight. So that's great. I'm a member, by the way. So Sean's a chapter lead. So we're all part of the family.
Yeah. It's awesome stuff. Okay, so the next bit is on here is Zafani. This access control allow origin. This is part of the cause. So cross-origin resource sharing. I'm going to try to explain this as quickly as possible in a easy way to understand. So you have two sites, Juice Shop being one, and another malicious site controlled by attacker. Now, the attacker could get the user's browser to make calls to Juice Shop, legitimate calls, and then fetch resources from that and render them with JavaScript on the attacker side and then pass the results. As you can imagine, that would be a really bad thing. You could start doing things like getting the entire page that the user's viewing, or pulling things out of there such as personal details, maybe even getting some of the response headers, so session cookies and that. That's obviously a very, very bad thing. So what browsers have as part of the HTTP spec is cross-origin resource sharing. So by default, it will not allow that. You can't, in some cases, you can still make the call, and that's called a simple, a basic request. I think that's the term. Basically, a get or a post with certain content types, like text plain, and I think the other one's WW form encoded, something like that. Point is, it's all online somewhere. If you Google it, you'll find it. Point is, under certain circumstances, you can make the call, but it still doesn't allow your browser to pass the results. Now, there may be cases where you actually want that to happen. So back in the day, but pre-HTML5, that was protected by what's called the same origin policy. So only the site itself could make a call and pass the results. That was a bit restrictive. So along came cross-origin resource sharing, and as the name suggests, you can start sharing resources across different origins. But now you need a mechanism of actually saying, hey, okay, this domain can do this, and this domain can do that. So what happens is your browser makes something called a pre-fired check, and it will basically go, hey, I'm making this request. It will make it to the server that's in the different origin. Can I do this? And the server will go, these are the servers allowed. And then the browser will check if it's things like the header, the method, the HTTP method, the domain, and there's different options. But the important thing is the domain, and this is where this access control at our origin is. Now, wildcard means anything. So what this means is any domain in the entire world can start making calls to this domain and then potentially pass the results. And as you can imagine, that's bad. So if I've logged in with like a session cookie, or got, in this case, my account details set somewhere, I can make a call, fetch those, and pass those. So this on its own is not a vulnerability, but if you can then have some sensitive information that you can do a cross-origin resource request and pull and pass, that's a bad thing. So you typically don't want a wildcard in this. There may be cases where you want to. Probably the biggest scenario where you might want to do that is in CDNs, where it's static content, it's publicly available. So you're going to make the call and you can pass it. Well, guess what? I can just call it anyway from any site. There's no sensitive information in there. So yeah, I'm just trying to look through any of the other headers. And then the other things that you probably want to check in the headers. So these don't have other headers. So one of them is like HSTS. So your Mark, remind me what it's called.
Strict transport security.
Yeah. So what that is telling your browser, these requests are always served over HTTPS. So your browser won't even make an HTTP call. It will always make the HTTPS call. And you can do things like preload it. So it's built into the browser to say, hey, this domain never, you can do it like domain level and work your way down. But this domain never serve this site over HTTP. So even if you type in HTTP blah blah blah, your browser will automatically convert that to HTTPS and make that call. So it'll never make an HTTP call. Just
on HSTS. So having the strict transport security directive in your headers is right with a decent duration. So that will force the browser to make every request during that duration over HTTPS. Include subdomains is another directive within that with that header, but be really careful with preload, because once you're on the preload, it's not easy or quick to get off preload if you have a problem. And because you have to have the long duration and include subdomains and preload in there to get on the preload list in the browser, then if you knacker your HSTS up on a subdomain, it will break your websites full stop. And it can take up to, I believe, shown 3 months to get fixed in the preload list. And that's not a great look for your organization.
Yep.
Just on Sean, just on X-frame options. So I've had a lot of problems with this over the years, particularly where you've got sites that interact with third-party domains and then they then redirect back to your domains and all this kind of stuff. So what we've found that we're having a lot more success with is putting the frame ancestors CSP directive in, and that seems to be a really clean solution to that problem.
Cool. But the point I wanted to make was HSTS. Probably going to have devs shouting at me and going, you evil person. If your devs don't want to do HTTPS, put HSTS on your root level domain and put it with the directive to have all your subdomains, and then that will kind of force everything to be over HTTPS. Just a quick and easy way. Might not be the right way of going about it, but I don't know. People can make their own judgment.
You could, or you could write an outbound rule on your border infrastructure that just forces everything over HTTPS, no matter whether the application supports it or not.
All right, so cover that. So some other things you probably want to also check. I think I've got it enabled. So you certainly can get plugins like retire.js and that, and they'll check some of the libraries, especially like the JavaScript libraries that are being used, whether they have any vulnerabilities. I just want to check. I don't think any have been reported. Nope. But yeah, if like these were out of date and had known vulnerabilities and like your retire.js picked that up, it would have been reported in your loads. So you know to then mark that as a finding. And obviously, it's going to very much depend on the vulnerabilities in the library. So other things you want to do is just kind of scroll through. Sometimes people leave comments in with nice juicy things like keys and passwords and perhaps locations to admin page in that. So you generally also want to make sure you have a quick glance over the HTML comments and see if there's anything juicy in there. So the landing page, I don't know about you, Mark, I can't really spot anything else from this that really stands out.
No, not really. A few things, but not a lot.
So actually, Fred actually raised a good point. Sorry, coming back to HSTS, it's a very good point. HSTS is only browser specific. So browser in terms of whatever the browser requests. APIs, depending on where the call. So if your browser is calling an API using JavaScript, that will be protected. But if you have, I don't know, a service or software calling those APIs, HSTS will not help in that case.
Correct.
It's a good call out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so just trying to think of the next thing. So let's take a look at the reports and actually see if there's anything juicy in here. So obviously working from the top down, top being the higher critical ones, and then these are kind of informational. I think I might even, informational, high priority, medium. So there's no major things standing out. Okay, so CSP is your content security policy. I like to think of this as kind of like a firewall for your web app on the client side, on the browser. It defines what resources can load from where in your browser. It's been a while since I've done it. Default source none means that you can't load any source files. Mark, you might help me out with this. This is why I Google things.
I think you're right. Just one sec. That's not me just Googling, that's me coughing. Yeah, you're right with that. But going back to your original point, it's a whitelist of things that will execute in the browser if you say they're allowed to execute in the browser. Anything that's not in the CSP will not execute in the browser. So it does provide, I guess, as you said there, a kind of client-side firewall. And it can be anything. It can be images, dynamic, static content, third-party, JavaScripts, anything that you like. It's a very powerful tool. It's a very easy thing to get wrong, but it's also quite easy to get right. There are things like report URI and other tools that exist. I think ASP.NET's got a report URI tool built into it that allow you to make sure you've got your CSP configured effectively. It's a really powerful tool.
Yep. So also you want to go to see if this comes up here. So Firefox or Mozilla have a really good site. This is why I kind of always I can't remember these things off the top of my head. You want to use this. This is really good as a reference and find out what the different directives do. So default source is kind of much like a firewall. You want to kind of block everything. May not always be the case, but you generally start off blocking everything and then allowing things through. I typically build my CSP policy that way, which is default source none, and then and then you build up from there. Start allowing the different parts. There's different ways you could do it. One is as I said, block everything, and then put in report only mode. So CSP has two modes: report only mode. Report only mode is content security policy -report reporting or something. I forgot the exact thing, but it's something similar to that. And what that means is your browser will still validate the CSP, but it won't actually block the requests. It will only send off reports. So that's going to be useful when you're checking things. It's not going to break anything. So you can use that to find any violations, and then once you cleared those, you put it into blocking mode, which is removing that bit and just having content security policy, and that means your browser will both block as well as report. Your browser will send it off to a report URI, hence the name of that service, report URI, that's got help runs. There's that as a service, or you can stand up your own. It's basically just a JSON that gets sent somewhere to the URI that's specified in your CSP policy, and your browser will send off any violations off to that. It's non-blocking, so if your browser can't send it for whatever reason, it won't hang things up. It does it in the background. So obviously to help in terms of performance issues. And it's also really helpful to find any potential breaches. So the browser allowed modified JavaScript. So if sites had CSP in, it could have actually blocked those requests, and someone monitoring those CSP reports could have seen something was happening, investigated further, and actually find out what was happening.
What else would have helped, Sean?
SRI.
Absolutely. So sub-resource integrity, where you hash the actual source file, and you put that hash into your call, the script call, and if that file is modified, then obviously the hash value is different, and it will not execute the JavaScript in your application. So that's another thing you can do.
Yep. All right. So actually, I don't know why these are being reported as an issue in terms of CSP wildcard directive. Oh. Well, I think, is it maybe reporting that as the issue? I think it might be that. Yeah, anyway. Okay. So we'll ignore those. Oh, this is going to be fun. Yeah, so again, as I mentioned, gone over this before. That's very verbose. You probably want to restrict it to the only the domains that are going to make it. All right, so session ID and URL reroute. Let's see. So it's making a request and set cookie. I don't see where the session ID is appearing in the URL reroute. Do you see this, Mark? I don't see any. Oh, there we go. So this is not good. The reason why this is not good is any sensitive information, you never, ever, ever, ever want to send that over a GET request, because what's going to happen is that parameter or query parameter is going to be placed in the URL. And that's going to be logged by things such as browsers, any intercepting proxies. In fact, I think there was an issue, I forgot which companies, but they had this very issue where they were had intercepting proxies. They were logging the requests, just like the URLs, and all the sensitive information was can appear in there. I think they logged additional stuff, but the point is that there can be intercepting proxies, and those will log the actual request URL. And guess what? This information is going to start appearing in those request URLs. So yeah, this certainly can appear in logs all over the place. So that's why you don't want to send this kind of information over a GET request. You probably you want to stick with the POST request, so it'll be sent in the actual request body. So that's all those. Socket. So this is coming back to the X-frame header. So this is a security header. X-frame header options. This defines where you can actually embed this site in a R-frame. So this is going to really help if you want to try to prevent like clickjacking, where an attacker will take your site, put it in the R-frame within their site, try to overlay stuff so people click on different parts and actually clicks on the site itself. This will help prevent against that. But that's not what we're looking at, because that's not going to be really useful to Exploit now. So another thing that I also look for, and I do call this out, is 500 errors. Now, to me, a 500 error means there's something happened on the server, a error that's not being catered for whatever reason. And this is something that you could probably look at investigating further, because there's some logic flaws somewhere. And a logic flaw typically, well, not always, but can often result in some security flaws. So it's well worth looking at these, and certainly at least reporting them, maybe as a minor or informational, saying, hey, you have this logic flaw somewhere in your code. You probably want to put some proper error handling around it, just so it returns like a 4441 or some other appropriate error message. Like 500 errors are generally not good to have.
Agreed, and just to add to that, really, they do reveal more about the application and possibly its back-end connections than you would like an attacker to actually see. So yeah, as you say, Sean, decent error handling. Well, fix the problem, right? But if you can't fix the problem, then put more graceful error handling in.
So here's exact example of why a 500 error, what can it do? So in this case, it's going to happen with a lot of languages such as Java, I think Node, which is this, Node, Ruby on Rails, and that they have a stack trace, and the default is just dump that stack trace. So as you can see here, this is the stack trace, so we can already see information such as it's running on Node for Express 4.7, or is that the actual version of OWASP Juice Shop? If this is a third-party product, well, guess what? Now I look up this version number and see if there's a vulnerability. Internal app, I can start seeing the layout of the application. I now know it's running Node. I can see what libraries are being used. Do some of those libraries maybe have vulnerabilities? I might not have the version number, but I can certainly go look for a bunch of vulnerabilities and start firing them off at the server. I can also start building up a logic around the code, how it's laid out, different parts of the code. So all of this information is information that is, it may seem trivial, but to an attacker it could be a goldmine. Just this one page, I can see a whole bunch of information. I know it's running Node, I know what kind of libraries it's using, I can see different parts of the source code in terms of line numbers, and I know there's a logic flaw here somewhere. That's
also, as well, Sean, just a quick one. Although a developer may not build a vulnerability into their code as part and parcel of actually cutting the code, the introduction of things like, I noticed AngularJS 14.12 in there, and other JavaScript libraries and frameworks. These are where I'm finding increasingly the problems exist, and you're seeing a lot more of an increase in XSS in third-party JavaScript components, and this is a problem. It's not to say that they're vulnerable to exploit, but they may be, and that's something that developers need to take into consideration.
Yep, exactly. So another one that is informational, so secure flag. So cookies have 3 flags. HTTP only means that this cookie can, things like JavaScript can't interact with it, can only be sent with HTTP requests. Same side as a new one, basically trying to prevent CSRF. I won't go into too many details about this. There's documentation, we can maybe even do a session covering that. And then the other one is secure, saying that this cookie should only be sent over HTTPS. Now, if that's not set, it is possible for the cookie to be sent over HTTP. So I would flag that as kind of informational, especially if you're browsing the site over HTTPS and that's it doesn't have that secure flag set. You would expect that to be set. Alright, so this is kind of where you were talking about, Mark, these additional frameworks or libraries being called. So I wouldn't call this a vulnerability. Depends where you're downloading it from. Like this kind of stuff, so from Cloudflare, generally you find a lot of the vendors actually do host in things like Cloudflare or CloudFront in AWS or somewhere like Google. It just means that it's easier on them and better user experience because those services have CDNs, content delivery networks. So basically nodes all over the world hosting this structure. So you rather go to that local node, loads faster in browsers, less traffic over the world, less traffic hitting their site, all of that kind of good stuff. But as Mark said, you got to be careful, make sure version numbers. You also want to have things like CSP or SRI around it because you don't control this. So what happens if this suddenly gets exploited? As we saw with Browser Loud, it's a third party thing. So if that gets exploited, you don't have control over it. You need to know when something's changed. And the only real way is either you doing a daily audit or get browser tools such as CSP and SRI to do it for you.
And in Browser Loud as well, there's an interesting juicy, right, I've said the word juicy now, just to get it out of the way. There's an interesting and indeed juicy irony in that. And I think it was 2018 when that happened. And I think 4,500 UK public sector websites got compromised by Browser Loud. And the juicy irony is that the Information Commissioner's Office website was a victim of that. And I think it was our very own Ian Thornton Trump that discovered it and reported it to Scott Hell. And that's what blew the lid off that one.
Yep.
And it was CoinHive, I think, was the exploit. I think it was some coin mining.
CoinHive. Yep. That was
CoinHive, yeah.
Which is no longer. Yay.
Yeah, they retired because they were rich, I think was what they said. Fair enough.
So other things, cache controls, so generally HTTPS pages. And again, not always. It's going to be depending where you want. If you've got information on there that you don't want people to gain access to, you probably want to disable caching on those pages. So when a user loads it on their browser, it's not saved on their system. But other things like static content images, JavaScript, CSS, and that you most certainly do want to cache those because you don't want every page to call the same thing again, both performance reasons and that. You might even have some HTML pages with static content, but generally when you interact, and you probably want to disable caching when there's sensitive information, private IP. This one, I think I've often seen it being a false positive more often. Obviously going to be very context dependent. I mean, if you're displaying like server logs or events on a site that you meant for viewing event logs, well, obviously IPs are going to appear in there, and that will be a false positive. Or you could actually be revealing the internal IP address of the server itself, in which case that's probably an issue. So it's going to very much depend on the context of the application. X content type headers, probably want to set this to no sniff, and yeah, this is just kind of security headers that you should be setting. I can't see anything else that's really interesting. Child set mismatch. Okay, that's out of the scope. We don't want to. And again, be very careful about the servers that you hit. So with these scanners, there's two types of scanning. There's active scanning, where you go like right click on this and go scan this, or there's passive. So while you're browsing, or actually do some checks, the passive means it's okay that it does that because it's not actually doing any like SQL injection attempts or something against the target server. It's just monitoring the traffic as you browse it. The active one will actually be the one that's sending out traffic. So that's why for these they're there, but this will be for part of the passive scan. I don't actively scan Mozilla's website, so you're going to be careful of that, so you don't scan sites that you don't have permission to. So these kind of things, I'm worried. Suspicious comments. So again, this is what I was pointing to a while before. Look at the code HTML source, JavaScript source. I don't know where the suspicious comments is. So here it is. The following comments snippet. Okay, that looks like a false positive. Well, it might be somewhere in there, but I can't see anything. And being on Cloudflare, probably don't expect it to be anything significant. Yeah, and this one's too big.
Yeah, suspicious comment could be anything. It could be where it sees the string RSA or password, key, that kind of stuff.
Some of those you can beat down a hole. And the last one, time disclosure Unix. Okay, so nothing really came out of that scan. Let's see if anything came out of the Necto scan. So I've never run a Necto, so I don't know what to expect out of the report. Scans that I've typically run are Burp Suite and NetSparker. Mark knows all about NetSparker. But yeah. XSS, I think this is deprecated now, is it not? XSS, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah, because they got rid of it, didn't they? Because it kept breaking shit.
Yep. Alright, so here's the first juicy stuff. Robots.txt. Now, this is used by apps to define what web crawlers, so like things like GoogleNet, can and can't scan and hit and index. And what you might have is sites say, hey, I don't want this to let people know about my admin page in the Google search results. So I'm going to disallow the scanner from, or the crawler from indexing admin. Well, now you've just disclosed, like here, oh, there's an FTP site or resource on the server. So if I now browse to it, so you start disclosing, hey, different parts of your site. Now you can see on this, we've got different things. Oh, so if I'm correct, this is a key parse database, which is a KDBX. So we certainly want to download that. Acquisitions.md. So this is Markdown. So this is probably. I wasn't going to display it nicely. Actually, you know what? Let's start. Another one. Coupons.back. Let's save this. Save link as. So downloaded that. Suspicious errors.yaml. We probably want to save all of these because this is, I guess, in an FTP site that people have uploaded things. So who knows what's in here. I don't know what GG is. Save all of these things. Encrypt.pyc. That's a compiled Python file. I've actually never dealt with trying to decompile it, Python, but we'll see if there's anything out there. And this is the kind of thing that you're going to find as you pen test apps, especially apps that you don't know much about. There's going to be technologies that you don't know anything about, and you're going to have to go off and research the different things. And quarantine, well, based on the name and GC malware, these are, I guess, malware or something. So we'll try to save at least one of them. Alright. So let's bring up our trusty terminal. Let's downloads. Alright, so first up is acquisitions. Alright, so as you can see, we have found some confidential information. So this is definitely, if you were doing a pen test, this would be like immediate phone call and saying, hey, you probably want to get this looked at straight away. This is publicly accessible, really sensitive information. You probably just want to put some sort of authentication on your FTP. And your robots to text, you probably want to remove that FTP site. The ironic thing around the disallow is you probably have now enabled information about this is available. Sure, the crawler might have crawled it, but it might have been way down in the ranks or something. Someone actually actively trying to security review the site, as you saw, quite easily got that information. So it's
actually,
ironic. It's just disclosed information.
And actually, many scanners, Nikto being an example, I'm pretty sure Zap does the same. I know NetSparker does. They actually actively look for robots.txt and humans.txt and so on and so forth. So applying a robot.txt is a complete waste of time, in my opinion.
I think it's okay as long as you do the disallow or make it generic. Just ignore my site completely. That's okay. When you start fine-tuning, only ignore certain parts. That's where you start doing the leaking information. So, or as you
pointed out yourself, Sean, just a couple of minutes ago, just apply bloody authentication and I'm done with it. That'll do it.
Authentication, sufficient authentication, I might add. Would
Adequate.
have been. Probably also FTP. You probably don't want to do FTP. I'm assuming it's some FTP. You probably want to look at something like SFTP, which is using SSH, so encrypting it, and that on its own would have authentication, or WebDAV, or some sort of similar technology. So we viewed acquisitions. Let's see if we can review the announcement. All right, so this one is encrypted. So I don't know how long we're going to spend on this. I won't spend too long on that. You're probably going to need a way to decrypt that, shove it through something. We'll get rid of Burp Suite because that was part of it. Coupons. Now, this is so given the fact that OWASP Juice Shop is a site that you buy things, we have a coupons page. It looks like some results or response, HTML response. Oh, it's in here. Not that interesting. Oh. So there's the Easter egg. So one interesting thing is this. What is this? So this here looks interesting. Apologies for the background noise. So let's quickly shove this in the browser and see what it returns. Oh. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this. It sometimes doesn't work the greatest in Kali for some reason.
You've got to love Kali's copy and paste feature. Really fantastic.
I don't know why in Vim and Kali it just really struggles to copy and paste. I don't know why. So it sometimes have to do that. Oh, so yeah, you can already start seeing. So there's obviously HUD files. Okay, there's shared secrets. Now I don't know if this is actually, and this is the other thing you're going to find when you throw a scanner at these things. They can sometimes generate noise. So now I don't know if this is actually part of a vulnerability in the app itself, or is this something that the scanner called and actually resulted in this file being generated, and this secret is actually associated with my scanner. The reason why I say that is there's things like Zap callback, Zap shared secret. So you probably need to investigate that further. So we'll leave that for now, and we'll come back to it. And then, as you can see, this is one of the reason why, like, someone goes, "Hey, just pen test this out for me, please. Can you do it by tomorrow?" It's not going to happen. You can see how quickly things can get complicated, and how you can spend time on these things. As I already mentioned, incident support.kdbx is likely a key parts file. I think, is it file? Normally if you do file, is it going to tell me? Yeah. So a good tool to use is file, to just run file and the file, and I'll tell you what file type it is. So as I suspect, it's key pass. I don't think I have key pass installed, and even without it installed, maybe it doesn't have a password set. So let's see. And just re-emphasizing, if you've got any questions or want to chip in or anything, feel free to unmute yourself and just chime in. So I got a message from Koshi. Zap injected that JS for your convenience for the HUD. Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's why you got to sometimes be careful. And this is where I've seen pen test reports. As Mark said, they sometimes produce a lovely report, and this is why you don't want to just hand someone a output of that report, because if I had that now, I would have gone to the report and said, look, I can't reproduce this. It's nowhere on my system, and that's because the scanner is actually generating it's part of functionality of the scanner itself. So whenever you have issues in a report, you must always validate them. Make sure that they in fact are a issue, a vulnerability, and it's not being caused by something else, or it might be a false positive.
Actually, I've got a question about Zap, but it's in relation to Burp. So with Burp, you've got the replicator tool, right? And replicator allows you to create the actual exploit, really, and then you can package it up. I think it's in an XML file or something. You can then send it to the air quotes customer, and then they can import it into their version of Burp, and then they can replicate the attack. Is that something that Zap supports? It's maybe not a question for you, Sean. I'm guessing you may not know it, but I'm guessing from the people that are in the Twitch, who are, let's face it, Zap experts by the sound of things, then maybe they've got a response.
Just to emphasize, I don't know. I personally don't know.
Yeah, me neither. Question for our OWASP development team that we've got.
And if not, wink, wink.
Yes, please.
But I think, I mean, if it doesn't have, and I know I said like wink, wink, I think it's a really good feature to have. One of the problems is sometimes these things can be complicated, or your devs might not know everything, and they don't have time to spending hours trying to learn this stuff. So what you do is just give a dev a file and say, hey, run this through the tool. We'll give you a brief introduction to the tool. Run this through the tool. If it passes, great, you fixed it. If it hasn't passed, well, then the vulnerability is still there and you need to fix it. You don't have to go into in-depth details. Sometimes these findings can get pretty complicated. So having something like that you can just throw at devs will make their lives easier. And generally that's going to be a good win from a security point of view.
One thing I think I might do this evening, actually, Sean, is put out a Twitter poll around who in the organization, in the enterprise, actually puts their developers through secure coding training. It's something that we're passionate about where I work, and we've got a 3-year program of OWASP top 10 training. So it'd be interesting to gauge what other people do, whether they kind of like leave it to themselves to go on Pluralsight, or obviously other training platforms are available, or whether they've actually got a proper program of secure coding training in place. So yeah, I'm going to do that tonight.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to try. Yeah, those are thoughts. I thought I might try without a password. So in this, there's probably a tool out there that you can use to try brute force this. I'm just trying simple passwords. So yeah, in this case, you probably would need to if you want to do this manually, you'd probably get a list of the common passwords, but I'd probably see if there's a tool out there that you could then use to try brute force this. Or also, one other thing, Google. So I know there were some weaknesses around key pass and storing different parts of the system and that, and there were ways of trying to work out the encrypted password that may or may not be possible here. So just Google it. Google key pass like crack or something like that, and you'll most probably find a bunch of stuff online and go from there. As well as I said, there might even be tools. I'm not going to do that now because we obviously an hour and quarter in. I don't know how long everyone wants to go on for, but we'll try to do a bit more. Alright, so the next one is Juicy Malware. So again, let's use file, see what it is. This is Mac OS, so I'm assuming it's not going to get. Alright, so this is obviously a text file. So that contains a link. I'm probably not going to download that, but assuming the name. Now, this is Juice Shop. So is it Juicy Malware for Juice Shop, or is it Juicy Malware as in stuff to do bad things to your system? I don't know, but yeah, you'd obviously, in terms of that, what you probably want to do is there's several ways of approaching that. One is actually we can try to do this now.
Just do it, man. Do it.
It's on GitHub, so I'm actually going to show you the first way that I typically do it. So there's a site called urlscan.io. So I do this if I don't want people to know I'm hitting their sites and that, because it's a service, so it's not going to be my IP address there. It also means that if there's anything bad, it's not going to be in my browser. Oh.
Just to point out, as Koshi just commented in Twitch, Juice Shop doesn't contain any actual malware.
Yep.
So you're quite safe.
Yeah. Let's go see. Alright, so this is the application. So you probably want to download this. When you're doing this, make sure you're on a system. So this is where VMs can be really handy. Create a VM. I have a sandbox VM. So I try to create it as base as possible. I've even gone as far as like my username is just some random, not tied to me anyway, username. I create snapshots, so every time I access a file or something like that, I then access it and then revert my snapshot when I'm done. I also make sure I keep my system up to date and then do a new snapshot at each time I update the system, and that way it just keeps clean. Now, there are other ways around this, so you can use something like Tails. Tails just kind of spins up, and then when you're done, you kill it, and that's that, done, dead. And then next time you start again, it'll start from the new refresh thing. Microsoft have actually a great thing. the Windows sandbox. It's amazing. It uses like Hyper-V in that in the back end. It's kind of like an app. You open the app on your taskbar, it spins up a new sandbox VM, and when you close it, everything's destroyed. It also syncs with your Windows version, so you don't have to worry about things like Windows updates and that. It's all handled. The only problem is it's Hyper-V, so you can't have things like VirtualBox or Workstation running alongside that. And then the other option is a cloud, so maybe a AWS Windows instance. You could do Ubuntu, but you might not get the Web UI stuff, or DigitalOcean or some other VM. Alright, so we downloaded that. Probably the next thing you want to do is go to VirusTotal, which I think is virustotal.com, yeah. So this will allow you to scan files and see whether they contain anything malicious or URL. Actually, I could have just put this in here and off it would have gone. So this will certainly scan things like malware and that kind of thing. Yeah, and it is all clean. So just doing due diligence. Let's just scan the file itself. Downloads. Okay, that's weird. No detections detected this file. Okay, well, it looks all fine. But again, it is a Mac file, so probably not going to be that useful. You might need to run on Mac and see what it does in a sandbox. You could also just try view it. So actually, another one, strings, and then file. This is going to be useful on binaries. So this will pull out any sort of string text in the binary. There could be things like keys or passwords that may be in there, or even URLs or something like that. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch. Generally, I might just pop this to a file so it's easier to parse. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of stuff, but you could also do things. My regex and that's not great, but grab. Nope. So there we go. There's a bunch of stuff here. There's password sets. There's nothing that interesting. Probably want grep -r, ignore case. Nothing there. And key. It's probably going to go down into malware analysis type stuff and all that. Again, this is interesting. So this is an RSA key. So if we view it, RSA. Oh. There we go. So this is an actual RSA key. This would actually be considered sensitive. So obviously you don't know yet where it's being used, but this is obviously appears to be a private key. So I'll just try to copy this. It's probably not going to copy. No. if anyone knows how you copy in Vim in Kali, please let me know. This is driving me up the wall. You know what? I might just.
We need a Vim expert, Sean. Do you know any?
It's just Kali. I mean, Ubuntu and that is fine.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I'm obviously doing something wrong. And now I've killed that. I wanted to get it out of there, but I don't think this is going to work.
So Frietta suggests add the spaces first and then select as a block.
Add spaces first and then select as a block. Yeah, I don't know exactly how you would do that. Sorry, I'm not a very big guru on Linuxy command line and that. I know enough not to get myself into danger, but I could use nano. That's really annoying. Nano. How do you search in nano? Is it there? Nope. Anyone know how to search in nano?
You know what the clever people do, Sean?
Google.
You copy and paste it into Notepad and then do it from there.
Yeah, I tried to open it in gedit and it crashed gedit. Is there no way? How do you search in nano? I'm gonna Google it. Nano search. This is why pen tests take so long. Your tools don't work. Control W. There we go. There we go. Crumbs. I forgot again. Are you kidding me? Sorry folks, this is gonna... I might just give up. This key. There we go, we get in there.
But Sean, an RSA private key being available is not a great thing. I think we'll all agree on that,
yeah.
right?
I'm getting stuck down the rabbit hole. Okay, so we've done that. Let's move on. Can't even use view anymore. I gotta maybe var. Maybe it's because I'm. Did I use view? Oh. Maybe I'm using view instead of var, and that makes a difference. Anyway, this one's probably not that important. It looks like terms of use. So probably something you'd have on the site anyway. This one I probably downloaded when I was importing, so didn't know that. That one there is interesting. Maybe not. Yeah, that's part of Zap again. Now, the interesting thing is, this is Zap. So it had to have actually injected these files into the FTP folder. So we should then use that as a next mechanism to see how these files got there, and then let's try add files. So what you would do is, obviously, from attacker point of view, as we saw, like there's malware there. Click on this. Here's the financial records for the year to date. which is an Excel spreadsheet which downloads malware or ransomware to the user's system. That kind of thing. So, yeah. That's where an attacker would leverage this not only to download but also upload things to the file system. And then the last one we want to look at the suspicious errors. Again, Zap. So it suddenly looks like Zap is uploading things to this. Is there any file upload feature? So there's a search feature. So test. So what I'm doing here is trying to do directory traversal because I'm assuming the search is searching for a file. So maybe it's searching for this might go up, which it's not doing. So again, see there's only that verify. So we'll have a look again and see if there's once we get to the sites. One of the other things that you also want to do, Scanner should have done this, but I just want to check for myself. So this here is testing directory traversal. So basically going up a directory, doesn't matter how many times you go up, once you get to root, it will just go back to root. So that's why you want to put in a whole bunch of backslash, forward slash. So you go up a directory, you don't know how far down you are, so you'll eventually get to root and go to that file system. Now, it hasn't errored something, and we need to go to Zap and actually, it failed because I wasn't on my proxy. So again, this is why you got to be careful. Just make sure you're on your proxy. Let's see. So interesting, a blank page. So this is all the, this is actually pretty cool. This is part of the Zap heads up display. So this is something that Burp doesn't have. So this is something that OWASP has over Burp's suite, and I think it's pretty cool. What do you think, Mark?
I agree. Yep, it's a great visual interpretation of what's going on. Yeah, it's cool. And
only if I actually knew how to use it. This is not the failure of the tool. This is a failure of me. I'll need to figure out how to use it. It's not the tool's fault. It's my fault for not knowing how to use it. So we want to see the history. Also, important thing is when you're doing these, you probably want to try filter. So URL. So I'm gonna try to get my regex here right. That's HTTPS. So what I'm doing here, I am trying to filter out all these socket calls. I'm not interested in them at the moment. So it's just creating a whole bunch of noise and making it really difficult to see what's actually going on. I think star. Star. I forgot my regex, right? I'm horrible at regex, so please forgive me. Those of you who are familiar with regex are probably crying out in pain. Let's see. How do you turn it on? I broke it. That didn't work. My regex is horrible, probably. Maybe I need that. Crumbs. Alright, I'm probably not going to get this working now, but we'll
Dude, I'm gonna shoot.
All right.
All right, man. But good luck with getting your regex working.
Thanks, Mark.
I'll
Catch you later.
catch you offline. All right. Thanks for listening in, Pete's.
Cheers. All right. Yeah, that's the. All right. So what's the time? Give it about another half an hour, and then I will call it. Just the way that people are. It's getting late. This works. Oh, I think that works. Yeah, thanks, Scott. All right. So we got a blank page, but it did return content, so maybe there's something else going on in the browser. Certainly, what I would expect to get back is the Etsy password file from the OS if there was some form of directory traversal. So we'll come back here. So again, it's going to be where you go from here is going to very much depend. Typically, you want to start tackling things that are available without authentication. So with that, you're not going to have to start having to do brute force in that. So we can see there's a search field here. So if we search for, I don't know, apples, what's return? Okay, great, apples. One of the things to look for is we search for apples. The results appeared here. So is it reflecting it? So we can search for apples, script, alerts. And this is going to be searching for cross-site scripting. So this doesn't mean it's bad. So if you go use, so when you're doing this, developer tools are going to be really useful. Right-click, inspect element will take you directly to that element. And when we go into it, so you can see this is appearing here. Now, this is either HTML or I don't know why developers tools don't do this. I really wish they'd show it actually encoded. So the way to check is if you go edit as HTML and it actually isn't encoded. Interesting. So there is a cross-site scripting vulnerability, but for some reason it's not triggering. We need to look at that. If this was encoded, you'd see something like less than, something like that. And I think this greater than, something like that. So you would then see something like that. And as you can see there, it's appearing. But that's not what's actually there. It is actually returning the actual HTML code, not the encoded HTML code. But for some reason, it is not triggering. So let's double check this. Let's double check it again. So that is definitely HTML. So the next thing you want to do is come to the console and see why it is not firing. So let's get rid of that. Just run this again. All right. Are there any errors? Let's get rid of just wondering if this might have anything to do with the Zap proxy. So one way you can test that out is actually not use the Zap proxy. Another thing you probably want to look at is a session container. This is going to be really useful when you want to test things like as a authenticated user versus a non-authenticated user within the same browser, or if you want to test something as one user and another user within the same browser. It's going to be really useful for comparing the both. It's just going to make your life a lot easier, rather than switching between like private mode and normal mode and that kind of thing. So this still hasn't triggered. The log should maybe be a bit cleaner now, that we don't have other JavaScript rendering. So we'll try this again. Go back to the console. Yeah, it's not firing off, which I find interesting. So why isn't it firing off? So let's inspect it again. Put a span. Okay, 100% sure. Script alert script. Yeah, it should. That should definitely trigger. I can't see anything there that's not why it wouldn't trigger. So yeah, well, I'll have to come back to this. I don't want to spend again too much time on this. You do have a further look. Maybe you might need to close off the tag, so probably try end the span, end span, end span. I don't think this is it, but who knows? And then create another span. Yeah, it's still not triggering. Yeah, I'll need to come have a look. Certainly not CSP, because if it was CSP, it would be firing here, and it's not HTML encoded. So something else is at play. Something else weird is going on. It should definitely. Oh. So the interesting thing is it's rearranging this as well. So this is the thing with cross-site scripting. You're probably going to have to play around a bit. So as you saw here, I ended the span, script alert script, and then open up a new span, and you can see the script alert script is appearing before that, like a new span. So it's changing things around. So it looks like it's trying to do some sort of filtering, and looks like you might need to do some filtering bypass. Okay, so let's just go back to my other window. So that's certainly an area of interest that you would want to look further. Next one is this account. So log in, and you want to see how this interacts. So I don't know, user password. Now there's several things that you want to touch here. So you can see it's an email address. You probably don't want to say. Although many sites do this, like you need a user email address to log in. Whether you want to distinguish it's a username or email address might just give some information away, but that's not really that important. You want to check if it protects against things like brute forcing. So same username, does it lock the account after a certain period, a set of invalid requests. Typically, you probably want to have anywhere from like 3 to 5 invalid login attempts, set like a few minutes timeout. Be careful not to make it too long. Too long, you end up creating a denial service type scenario where the attacker can just constantly hit the same account and then lock the user out indefinitely. And when they enter the wrong username and password, don't tell them the password's wrong or the user doesn't exist. That gives information away that the other user exists on the system or not, and it just helps the attacker. So you want a generic message just saying wrong email password, like something like this is good. Another thing you want to test on user login is SQL injection. So something like this. This is like a true positive. So this here will end off the query for the email address. This will always be true. So that means your user could then potentially log in. And you want to end the query and -- for comment. So just nuke everything at the end of the typical query. And there we go. So we can see here this has a SQL injection. So if we come back to the Zap and just re-emphasizing what I did there. So in the login, you can see the request. So if you were thinking of this as a SQL query, I'll just show you what it kind of looks like. So you might have something like select star from user where email equals plus email plus and password equals. So this is probably what it looks like. I'm just assuming. I obviously don't know the query. I've not looked at it in the code. But that's something like, I imagine what it's going to be similar. So if we now take this, say my username was, my email was test, or in that case, user test.com. My password is equal to, say, pass123. Very strong password. The resulting SQL would then become this. User at test.com. And whatever the password hash is, I'll just put asterisks. Hopefully they're password hashing, and that's not important. So in my case, we added this in, so the query then becomes that. So as you can see, the end bit's been nuked off as a comment, so this will be ignored. And the actual query is select star from user where email equals the email address, or 1 equals 1, and this would equate to true and fetch the users. And typically it would, the code would probably fetch the first user in the system, which would generally be your admin user. So that's why you can see we've actually logged in with the admin accounts. So I'm now admin on the system, and from here I can go further. I think that's a pretty juicy point to stop. It's certainly a good attack, and this is something that you would definitely want to report straight away. Get an admin to the system, as you can imagine, is pretty significant. From there you can create users, change. We'll have to see what the admin account has access to. They could have access to all these kind of things. Hopefully you can create accounts and change product prices and that kind of thing. We'll see how far you can get with that. But yeah, so I think that's a good place to stop. So yeah, I will put it on Twitter and see how everyone feels about probably picking up another session and then going on from here. Hopefully this has been useful for people. As I said, I've not touched this before, so apologies if it seems a bit haphazard, but this is generally how a pen test works, so I just wanted to go over my process, like kind of the things that I go through, and it gives you a kind of feel of just how challenging sometimes these things can be, how much work's often involved, and maybe give you a sense of guide and direction of how to approach a pen test somewhat. So really glad we actually got somewhere in the end and got something juicy. Hey, Juice Shop, get something juicy out of it. And yeah, thanks for attending. And if any comments on that, just please let myself or Mark know. And thanks for attending. It's been fantastic having you all. And hope you all have a great evening.